Peter? Can't turn the cicadas.
I asked them to try and keep the noise down, but they never pay attention.
I know you can deal with the music, but not with them.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming out to our class today. My name is Doug, and we're going to talk about pests in the garden, both bugs and animals. So we'll talk about some of those things. We'll talk about products that can help to deal with them. I'll show you some of my favorite plants, the ones that are going to be less likely to be eaten by animals, and we'll try to answer your questions as well. The class will run for about an hour. I asked the cicadas to kind of quiet down. I'm not sure if it's working today. So I'll try to speak up. Let me know if you can't hear me. Ken can probably, alter the volume a little bit. One thing as far as, here's a little housekeeping thing. We have these lists on our website. They're called the Garden Talk. And we're going to have a clipboard that will pass around so you can put down your email address and you'll receive a link to these. And this is above and beyond if you already receive emails. This is a separate thing just for people in the class. These two lists what they're about really are lists of plants that javelina on the one hand don't like and deer and rabbit on the other don't like. And there isn't much overlap. So if you have both javelina and deer in your yard, my condolences, because you've got a challenge there. In my yard, it's mostly javelina. So I have picked out mostly plants that they don't like. That's, I think, the key. And for my vegetable garden, I have a wrought iron gate with spikes on top and mesh down below. Otherwise, they'll come through and they'll eat everything. This summer, my neighbor had a huge crop of apricots. A lot of them dropped on the ground, and the javelina came in and ate all the ones on the ground. I ate a lot from the branches, so it worked out well, and they kind of cleaned up the noise. But you could tell when they were there because you could hear them crunching the pits. Javelinas are kind of noisy eaters. So when the clipboard comes around, if you want to get these in the link, and this, by the way, this Garden Talk on our website, there are many topics with little brief descriptions of the topic and what could be done. So in general, what you might say is that if you want to keep pests and animals away, a lot has to do with selecting the right plants for the right location, taking care of them, and just in the same way that a healthy plant is going to ward off pests. Plants that are hydrated, well hydrated, are less likely to get bark beetles. They're less likely to suffer frost damage. So in the wintertime, when we hear that there's a frost coming on, we should go out and water the plants that day before the frost comes that night. So that's a good practice to keep in mind. And so the other thing is, as I mentioned, the list, selecting the plants that they're less likely to eat. There are no guarantees. In the middle of winter, deer may come through and eat plants that they normally would ignore. We can't help that, but it's a practice, practice of trying to stay away from, to try and keep our plants healthy, to keep animals and pests away. So we'll talk about some of the products and also show you some plants that I like that I think are pretty good and fairly pest resistant. There's no pest-proof plant in the world. It doesn't exist. We just have to use our judgments to try and keep them away. So the first thing I want to talk about is, well, here's gophers, for example. How many people have problems with gophers or subterranean? Okay, so we have, over the years, we've tried different products. There are traps, there are these little smoke bombs, all kinds of things. I think this gadget is probably the most effective. And what this allows you to do is to probe in the ground where you can feel a tunnel, and then you can release some poison pellets. That's what comes in here. So as opposed to people say, well, I'll just cover up their hole. That doesn't discourage them. They just dig a different hole. You can put poison or bait in a hole and they'll just go to another one. This way, if you find them in the ground and they're down there, they'll eat this, they'll die, and then they'll just stay buried so you don't have to deal with them. A friend of mine has a dog that's very active, likes to chase gophers, likes to dig them out of the ground and drop them at the back door. So oftentimes dogs or cats, this is what they like to do, we know. But so I like this better because you don't have to see them, you don't have to smell them, they're gone. You don't have a proud puppy bringing you a dead gopher. So some of the plants that are, there's always a good rule of thumb is lavender, rosemary, sage. People say, okay, I want something that the animals won't eat. Lavender, rosemary, sage are always good bets. Anything that's herbal, usually the smell is so strong that they'll stay away from it. So we have some of those. Here's a small lavender plant. That's always good for deer and javelina. Rosemary is a perennial that grows quite prolifically and is almost never eaten by any animals, but we like it. We can put it in our recipes. We can cut this off and throw it on the barbecue, that sort of thing. And sage, we have some Russian sage. We have autumn sage. That's in the big salvia family. That's always a good choice for something that animals will stay away from. So when I say animals, I'm talking mostly about javelina, deer, and rabbits. Those are kind of the main culprits. We already talked about gophers. We sometimes have a class that's just in gophers and how to deal with them. Because once they come into your yard, it can be a problem getting rid of them. I had this bed of beautiful red potatoes, and the gophers harvested them the day before I could get to them. So we'll pass this around along with a sample of the list. So if you're interested in receiving these documents, a link to them and other things, feel free to sign up for that. And that shows you a little bit about what some of the plants are. So, yes?
I mean, I'm new to this area, but how do you know when you have gophers and what I'm not familiar with them?
Okay, I'm going to repeat the questions because we have an online audience. Make sure they've heard the question. Linda's question is that, how do you know if you have gophers? Well, usually you've got little mounds of dirt. They dig the tunnels and they dump the dirt up on the top of the soil. So you'll see these little mounds of dirt and you'll probably see holes. And they could be anywhere. Like they could go after your fruit trees, for example. When you walk down to that area, they could be digging up there. So that's usually a telltale sign that you've got gophers. And they can do some real damage to your plants. Any other questions? Let's just talk a little bit about products. So we were talking a little bit before the class about bark beetles, and we have this product here that's called tree and shrub drench, used to be called plant protector. This is a once a year application. It's a systemic product that you pour in the ground. How much you use is based on the thickness of your tree, but it's something that can help with bark beetles and bugs in general. Um, and it works for the whole year. So something as big that's a large tree that might be difficult to spray. My trees are kind of large, so spraying is not practical because it kind of comes raining back down on me. This is what I use. And I'll get maybe 2 or 3 of these. And once a year, I mix it up in my 2-gallon water container and just drench the ground. This helps with thrips on my pear trees. It helps with bark beetles in the pinyon pines and ponderosas. It doesn't help with cicadas, by the way. There's really nothing that you can do about them. And I remember last year, this lady came in and said, the cicadas are so noisy and annoying on my deck, I can't even have a conversation. I want to kill them all. I said, good luck. I mean, they're way up in the tree. You can't get to them. And I don't know that there's a product that'll really work. So unfortunately, we have to learn to live with them. And maybe be thankful that they aren't as bad as I grew up back east when you'd have the 19-year cicadas would come along. They could fly in your face. You get to your car and they were piled up on your windshield. Then what do? Turn on the windshield wipers and they start flipping all over. I mean, cicadas are just part of life. Yes, ma'am. Cicadas, I think, are not so much just specific trees, but I think they like older trees. Up here, we have a lot of cottonwoods. So I think they like those. But generally, if you live in a community where the trees are relatively young, it may not be attractive to them. But if you live in an older part of town with established trees, you're likely to get more cicadas. It's just one of the wonderful things that summer brings to us. Back to gophers, I forgot to mention this. In addition to the product that I showed you, they also have these Gopher Shields. So when you say you're going to plant a tree, but you're aware that there have been gopher problems in your area, you can get this net. It's a mesh that comes in different sizes, and you wrap up the root ball before you put it in the ground. And it helps to prevent them from eating all the roots before the tree can become established. So this is a good thing, and I think there's several per package, and it has, this is for 1 gallon, smaller one, but they go all the way up to 15 gallon, which would be a good sized tree. I want to show you something else. Another underground problem that we have here, they're grubs. And grubs, I don't know if you can see here, but they're these, if you haven't seen them, then it's a good thing because they're ugly. They are basically beetle larvae that are in the ground. And in the summertime, they come out and they can eat all the roots on a shrub. I had one of my favorite shrubs I planted the year before, seemed to be doing okay. All of a sudden it wasn't. And I went over to touch it and just kind of pulled it out of the ground as if it had nothing attaching to it. It didn't. The roots were all gone, but all these grubs were there. And they're easy to spot. You can just dig a shovelful. If you're wondering, do I have grubs around this tree? 1 shovelful will usually tell you that whether they're there or not, because you'll see them, and they're big and curly. And the problem is also that once you get grubs, then you may have javelina or raccoons come because they like to eat them. So they can make a mess digging things up. I once remembered a lawn I had that was all buckled up in the morning because raccoons were digging up the turf and eating the grubs. So these granules, this is called systemic insect granules. They will help you sprinkle on the ground, wash it in, and take care of a grub problem. And you can have grubs in a vegetable garden as well. They like the roots of vegetables. Maybe less likely to hurt an established tree, but smaller shrubs, that can be pretty damaging. Now, usually we don't have too much of a problem with bugs, with snails and slugs, because it's not really damp enough here, but it can happen. So we have a product. If you've lived in other parts of the country with a rainy season, you know that snails can be all over the place, and they can eat a lot of your garden while it's raining at night and you're trying to sleep. So this is a product for that. It's called bug, slug, and snail bait. Oftentimes, we will notice that our plants, whatever shrubs, roses, they may get fungal problems. Typical one is powdery mildew, little white powder on the leaves. And so we have this product called Revitalize. So it's a biofungicide, and it treats a lot of the brown spots, things that you might get like on your roses or photinias. And you can spray this on, or you can do soil drench. Because I have a lot of shrubs, I'll just mix this up. I'll drench them 2 or 3 times. Every couple of years, my photinias will come back, and the powdery mildew will make a comeback. So I try and treat it pretty promptly before it spreads to the other plants. Anybody have grasshoppers in their yard? There you go. I'd like to loan you my cat. He loves to go after grasshoppers, and he crunches their skeleton, bites their legs off, but he doesn't travel very well. And so we have this product here. It's called Turf Ranger, and it's just something that you can spread around the perimeter of your yard to help. It'll help kill grasshoppers. This is similar to Nolo bait, which is not available this year, but it's something that the way this works is that only grasshoppers are attracted to this. That's what they eat, and then they die. Otherwise, it's tough to spray a grasshopper with a contact spray because usually when you approach them, they fly away. So Turf Ranger is a good product for grasshoppers. What else? Okay, so how about just regular? Yes, ma'am.
Back to the Turf Ranger. Is that safe for deer or dogs if they run into it?
Yeah, it's not going to hurt them, and should be safe with them. Now, our number one bug killer is this product called Sayonara, and it's something that you could put on your shrubs, you could put on your vegetables. A couple of days later, it'll be okay to eat them. This is comes in a concentrate, but we also have a ready to use that you can just hook your hose up to it. So it's pretty good, and it'll for all the bugs that we get that include bugs, thrips, mites, whatever they might be. This is a good product. Some people prefer using something that's a little bit milder, perhaps. So we have this triple action. This is a product that's mostly neem oil, and so it tends to kind of smother the bugs. This works. We have both concentrate and ready to use, but this ready to use works better if you've got, say, small vegetables and you just want to spritz them. This works pretty well. You just have to be cautious, or don't use it when it's really hot, because the oil beads up on the leaves. It might be a little bit hot for them. So triple action, and this can also help with some of the fungal problems that we talked about. Okay, anybody have a vegetable garden? You do? Okay. So you may have noticed that your tomatoes get these little brown spots down at the bottom. That is called calcium deficiency, basically, is what that is. So this yield booster, which you can spray right on the plants, gives them a calcium boost. Our soil here is kind of deficient in calcium, and so this can happen. You'll see this brown spot is kind of unattractive. Before I started working here, I thought, oh, maybe I'm giving them too much water, and it's like, focusing down at the bottom of the fruit. Not the case. It's calcium. So yield booster is a good product for that, and it's ready to use. You can just spritz it on. Also, on your tomatoes, you may get tomato hornworms. Has anybody seen one of those big green worms? The way that you can tell that you have them is that you'll see a branch with most of the leaves have been eaten on the tomato branch. Um, and you get a couple of them and they get big and fat and juicy, and they can eat a lot of your plant away. This is something you can spray on there. It's also good for plants like geraniums that get little other worms that will eat the buds. So this is called Caterpillar Killer Spray. It's with BT. BT is the active ingredient and it works very well with caterpillars. Any questions about that? Yes, sir.
We have geraniums that are eaten all the time. It seems like it's a grasshopper bug. So can you use that spray, or do I have to go back to?
Yeah, you can use that spray. I think it'll work on grasshoppers too. Or the question was about grasshoppers. I think she has grasshoppers versus worms on the geraniums. You could use the other two insecticides I mentioned. Cyanara will work. The BT is kind of specific to worms, so it may not work as well on grasshoppers. The thing is that, yeah, I mean, you can spray this on and see if that takes care of the grasshoppers.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a large infestation of aphids.
Uh-huh.
They eat the plants right up.
Okay, so he has a large infestation of aphids. Welcome to the group, right? I mean, a lot of us do. They're all over my roses at times. I spray for them. The cyanara that I just mentioned would be good. What kind of plants are the aphids
These are
on? Vegetables? Okay.
They really like squash plants.
Yeah. And you can also, in the summertime, you can get squash bugs as well as aphids on your vegetables. For that, I would recommend this triple action. Just try and smother them with this oil. This is mostly oil. And so it can get rid of these. Spritz it. If it doesn't work, you can try the cyanara. But I think this is the first bet. Plus, when you spray for aphids, squash bugs, whatever you might have on your vegetables, it's easier with this if you can get underneath the leaf as well, because they sort of hide under there. Right? So, yeah, it's true. Our vegetables are likely to get bugs this time of year. It's warm, it's humid. They like the environment. We're providing them with some nice food. But after all, it's our vegetable garden, not theirs, is the way I look at it. So, yes, sir.
It was recommended to use diatomaceous earth, but I'm not having much luck with that.
Right. So the question recommendation was to use diatomaceous earth, which is a good product, but that's usually something that you put on the ground for bugs that are typically on the ground. So, but some of these other, aphids and some of these other bugs, grasshoppers, they're more up in the air. You can use the diatomaceous earth, and they may kill earwigs, ants, and so on. But it's probably, unless the aphids get down on the ground into that diatomaceous, it's probably not going to do anything.
On the back side of all the leaves.
Yeah, that's where you want to spray them with this. So, any other questions about insecticides? Yes, ma'am.
So this isn't about insecticide. I guess we mentioned critters and we didn't hit on rodents too much. Wood rats.
Well, okay. So the question is, other rodents in the yard, and this is a real challenge. They are. I mean, you've got mice, you've got pack rats, you've got roof rats, whatever. Squirrels. How do you keep them away? I don't know. You can try and trap them. You can, you can have some animals that might go after them, like maybe a dog and cat. They can team up on them. It's not easy to keep them away, and it's not always easy to tell what is eating your plants, right? I mean, you were talking about this the other day, Ken, right? Okay, is that a squirrel? Is it this? I mean, even this morning I took my puppy out early in the morning. I come back to the front door. On the floor mat, there's mouse droppings. I thought, wait a minute. I had a whole thing with a rodent company. They put mesh and foam in every single nook and cranny that any rodent can come in. They're not in the house. They're trying really hard to come in though, because I see them right at the door. So when this puppy grows up, I hope she'll take some interest in going after them. Maybe not, but there's no real easy answer. I mean, trapping is not fun, but sometimes you have to do it. It's really kind of impractical to think that you can get rid of every rodent in your yard because they'll come back. A lot of us live maybe near an outdoors area, a national forest, or whatever. So, yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so the question is, does the smell of mint deter animals? Yes and no. It's something that you can try. For example, we have here geranium. So some people will surround their desirable plants, like their vegetables, with geranium because bugs don't like them. We have another product I forgot to bring up here. It's a sort of in a pellet form, and if you had, say, one or two new plants which are usually very vulnerable to rodents or pest attacks, you can put the pellets around this new plant or plants, kind of like a perimeter, and the pellets don't smell good to the animals, and when they get wet, they don't like the texture. They're kind of sticky and tacky. So that's something to try. These are good. They do have kind of a strong scent, primarily it'll deter bugs. But if this were the plant you're trying to protect from your chipmunk or whatever it might be, I would try the pellets. The pellets are down there. There's a spray, but I think pellets work better. So you could create your own little protective zone around a new plant. So
What was that plant you said?
that was a marigold.
Miracle.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to now talk about a few plants to show you some samples, if everybody's okay with that. Any other questions about bugs, insecticides, anything like that? Okay, so, yes, ma'am.
These products, are they harmful like putting on your spray that you put to get rid of the aphids on the spot?
Are they harmful to?
Humans,
No,
your vegetables.
no, they're okay. You can,
Systemic.
right, the systemic one, but the systemic product. So the question is, are the products that we have here, are they harmful to humans? The answer is no. I mean, obviously, you're not going to ingest them. You're not going to spray them on yourself. But more likely, the question is going to be, okay, can I spray them on my vegetables? And the answer is yes. With the insecticides, I wouldn't eat the tomatoes on the day you sprayed them. I'd give them a couple of days. Obviously, you're going to wash them off before you eat them. But most of these products are pretty benign. They don't have we don't sell like Roundup and some of these products that are kind of toxic that some people get worked up about. I was spraying product on my weeds, my yard. And this lady came by and said to me, "I hope you're not using Roundup." I thought, here we go. I'm going to get a lecture now about insecticides. I said, don't worry about it. What I have here, and I told her about the ingredients and why I thought it was safe. And then she went on her way. And afterwards, I thought, well, thank you for sticking your nose in my business, but I guess it's everybody's business, right? If we all spray the ground with something harmful, we're all affected. We all drink the same water after all. So anyway, it's a trade-off. There are people who come in and say, I don't want to spray anything. I don't want to trap the animals. I don't want to do this and that. Then I say, okay, well then you have to decide. It's either your garden or you let the bugs and the animals do whatever they want. Those are the choices. So most people say, I want to do something about it. Some people say, well, look, I can tolerate a certain level of damage. As long as I get the rest, then I'm okay. And that's another approach some people use. After all, they say that in all the plants that grow all over the world, that bugs and birds and other animals eat about 60% of them. And we humans are left with the other 40%. So they get to it before we do. That's a question of what the right balance is. I mean, when the gophers ate all my potatoes, my red potatoes, I was pretty annoyed. They didn't leave anything for me, you know. I'd be willing to share a little bit, but not the whole thing, right? After all, I planted them, not them. So I want to show you a couple other plants, some of my favorites and some that I think will do well in your yard that I think animals will, for the most part, stay away from. So we'll just go through some of them. You've probably seen these Rose of Sharon shrubs. They're flowering all over the place now, getting really big. I have several of these in my yard. Some are pink, some are purple. You see all these buds on here. I mean, they're still going strong. They like the weather. Animals don't bother them. You have to allow room for them. They can get to be pretty big. I've seen some that have turned into small trees. I keep mine at kind of a shrub level. And they're also close to my roses, so I don't want them to get too big so they kind of outshine the roses. But Rose of Sharon, a great shrub here. It'll come back every spring, die back in the winter. Butterfly bush, a great standard type plant. Butterflies, hummingbirds love these. They grow and flower most of the summer. Usually animals don't bother them. And we have some tall, we have a couple of sizes. Some are about 3 by 3. Some can get really big. Before you select a large one, I want to make sure you have an idea of where you're going to put it and be sure there's plenty of room there. But usually these come in a couple of different colors. They'll flower most of the summer. And they hang on to some of their leaves in the wintertime. They're sometimes described as a semi-evergreen, in that if we have mild weather, they'll probably hang on to the leaves. Usually when I prune mine, and maybe in February, they still have some leaves on them. But we have some nice butterfly bushes here. This plant is Lantana. It's one of my favorites. Animals usually don't bother them. They flower most of the summer. This happens to be an annual version of it. Lantana we have in both perennial and annual versions. So anything you see up here is going to be an annual Lantana. So that means it's just good for the season. But down below we have a plant called Miss Huff Hardy Lantana. And it will survive the winter. It won't flower much really until it gets hot. But once it gets going, I have one in my yard. It's about this wide and this tall. And it's right by the street. And it's got these beautiful orange flowers. All around here, you'll find the annual version with different colors. Miss Huff kind of comes a little bit lighter than this. But Miss Huff is a good version for a perennial lantana. How about Crepe Myrtle? Crepe Myrtles are really showing their stuff these days. And they have beautiful flowers. They, a little bit like the lantana, don't do too much until the weather gets hot. And so they are deciduous shrubs. Once they start flowering, maybe late June, they'll flower almost all summer, then die back in the winter. But we have them in a couple different colors. Most of them are shrub-sized plants. In other parts of the country, you'll see crepe myrtles that are as big as a house, but not so much here. They're a little bit smaller, but they're great shrubs. I have a couple by my driveway that are pink, and there was a gentleman who used to walk up and down the street, and he would say something when I was out there working on the plants, and he had this heavy accent, and I couldn't figure it out. Finally, it dawned on me what he was saying is nice crepe myrtle. So this guy was a gardener, and he admired a plant that was doing nicely. So that made me, that if you like compliments from other gardeners.
How big do those get?
How big do the
How
crepe?
big do the
Crepe myrtles get to be about 3 or 4 feet tall and wide, most of them, yeah. Earlier this year, we had kind of a tree version that'll get taller. I don't know if we have any more of those, but most of the shrub ones are going to be in the 3-4 foot tall and wide range. And you can cut them back in the winter so they don't get too leggy looking. Anybody like roses here? So do the deer, unfortunately. Uh, my yard, the javelinas have stayed away from them, so I feel fortunate. But I'm very partial to yellow roses because I think that the yellow is this deep saturated color, and it's right outside my front door. So I walk out there in the morning, say hi to my roses, maybe do some deadheading. Uh, they're just kind of like my babies. I spend more time fussing over them than the other plants, which are, require less maintenance. But they do, they're starting to come into their next bloom. And in May, there were lots of flowers. I mean, each plant had maybe 50 roses on it. So, they go through June, which is a difficult month. Now that it's been raining and it's fertilized, and they're coming back. And we still have ground cover shrub roses, some climbers. So those are the three types of roses that we have. This happens to be a shrub. Shrubs get to be about 3 or 4 feet tall. If you're new to the area, you should know that roses do very well. They're because of our low humidity, they're less susceptible to some of the fungal problems that roses might get in other parts of the country with higher humidity. And they they flower all summer. Mine hung onto the leaves till almost December. And then if you have a big plant, the pruning time is in March. That's when you do it. So we might have grown roses somewhere else, different schedule. That's what works well here. But be prepared for aphids. Aphids love these. So, and some people, we have all these products here, and some people talk about, grandma's recipe of vinegar and dish soap. And I mean, if that works for you, great, have at it. Some people say, well, it kind of knocks them down for a little bit, then they come back again, and eventually they may try the product. But you just have to be aware. There's also thrips, which will get into these buds. Thrips are very difficult to see. They're little tiny plants, bugs, and they'll prevent the flower from opening. So if you have a rose and the bud looks like it's never going to open, it has little brown spots on it, that's probably thrips. We can identify this along with almost any other problem you have. You bring in the cutting, photograph of the plant. We go straight to the microscope and try and diagnose, because if this plant had thrips on here, I couldn't see them. They're really too small.
When you have roses in pots, what do you do during the winter with them?
So the question is about the roses grown in pots. Would you do anything special in the winter? The only thing I would do is if the temperature gets like 10 or lower, real cold, you might cover them up for a night or two, because the soil in pots can sometimes freeze faster than the ground soil. So if they're in the ground, I wouldn't bother with them. I don't think they need any help. But in pots sometimes, and this applies to plants, any plant that's in a pot, but to roses as well. All the perennials that we have here, whether they be shrubs or trees or so on, they have plenty of cold hardiness. Most of our plants are good down to almost 0 to 10 degrees. Rarely we get temperatures a little bit below that, and that could be the time that you cover up.
Cover with
Frost cloth, pillowcase. I'm amazed at some of the things people put, old towel, so on. We have this frost cloth, which is sort of like a cheesecloth, and they come in big rectangular sheets, so we can cover whole things. In the springtime, that's the thing about the climate here. You get into March and April, and you have beautiful sunny days, maybe the 50s or 60s, and then whoops, all of a sudden the night it's 30. But the plants have already started flowering, and so they're confused. And while most of the plants, they'll survive the freeze, the flowers might not. So when we had 2 cold snaps a while ago, we had some evergreen shrubs that had some nice new growth on them, a couple inches, and it got zapped by the cold. And it affected a lot of people. Some of them called in and said, they would call and say, my plants are dying. My shrub is dead. I said, wait, hang on. Let's take a look at it. Chances are you just cut off that dead growth, which I did on a couple weekends on a whole lot of shrubs. And when I came back the following weekend, there was already new growth coming back. So the plants will survive. The new growth may not the end of the world. The plant will come back because anything that we have that's a perennial is suited for our climate here, and it has plenty of cold hardiness. So any other questions about cold weather? Yes.
One of the things you might mention, Doug, is when it gets real cold like that, it's a good idea to water the plants because they tend to do better once it gets down real cold.
Right. So we may not think of that. You know, say we see the weather report. 2 days, it's going to be 15 degrees. That's the time to water your plants. And by the way, watering isn't just a summertime practice. You got to water in the winter, especially evergreens, maybe once a month or so. Most trees need to be watered because there probably is not going to be enough precipitation in our winter storms. They don't amount to very much. And a little bit of snow doesn't do much of anything. It's very dry snow, doesn't have much moisture in it. So watering before a cold snap, watering on a regular schedule in the winter of once or twice a month, you know, unless we get some really heavy rains. And then summertime, your regular watering schedule, your irrigation system, whatever that might be. So, and we have a whole class in irrigation and watering practices as well. But it's important, but it's really easy to forget in the wintertime we may have a mild, dry winter, and the plants might suffer because they're not getting water. Then that leads to, okay, then they're dehydrated. Then they're susceptible to bark beetles, and you're sort of going down this, you know, less favorable path to your plants without some kind of care. The other thing, as far as maintenance, that, you know, when you want to water, but you want to fertilize as well. I didn't bring a bag of our fertilizer, but we have this organic fertilizer. It's a slow release product. It's not chemical at all. It's really good for everything in your yard. That's the beauty of it. I walk around with a bucket full of this fertilizer, and I put it on everything. Kind of use the unscientific method of big trees get a lot, little trees get less, and it works. I call it the Johnny Appleseed method. My trees are doing pretty well. So that's something that we have down there. I mentioned the microscope, the photograph and with a sample together. We come and take a look at it. You'll be surprised what you can see. We want it to be a fresh cut sample, not something that's been in the car for a couple of days. But if you have aphids on whatever it might be, and you see them on the microscope, it's amazing. I mean, they're enlarged 200%. So when I look at those pictures of aphids, it reminds me of why I decided not to get into entomology, right? Because I don't like them. They kind of give me the creeps, but they're part of life here. We have to learn to kind of deal with them. I want to show you a couple annuals. This is a Vinca plant that's an annual and will flower all summer. It doesn't need a whole lot of water. It'll die when it gets really cold. And we have lots of them over there, all different colors. There's a pink and a peach and a deeper red. But one of my favorites is this. So this is a hanging plant. I mean, it's in a hanging pot, obviously. It's called Portulaca. Portulaca is basically a succulent. And I got one of these early this summer because I like them a lot. It was 1 gallon pot, right? My plant is already bigger than this. So they just grow really nicely. They'll hang in there till maybe late October. Sort of depends on what the weather brings us, essentially. But I'm just mentioning some of these annual plants here because they're still here. They have lots of color. If you're so inclined, you want something by the front door or on your deck, they're going to be good until probably October and keep flowering. But Portulaca is one of these. I got one that's kind of a rhodamine color. It's really nice.
Will that regenerate?
No, the Portulaca is an annual. So it's just good for the season and that's it. It'll die and it will not come back.
They grow inside by a window?
By a window? It might grow inside, but it gets so big that you're going to need some space there. But any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What time of year would you suggest treating pines for the bark beetle?
Okay, so the question is what time of year to treat for bark beetles? And I would say almost any time except winter time. But right now, with the weather, is probably an excellent time to treat them because the bugs are going to be alive. The product that I mentioned, that's the systemic, this is a good thing to put on there rather than try and spray them, I think. But you could do this right now, but you only have to do it once a year. So usually in the wintertime, the bark beetles may not be as active, but right now, if they're busy in your tree, it's a good time to treat them and try and address that problem. We'll have to look it down there. I can't do it while I'm doing the class, but on the microscope is where we want to look at it. That's down below. So, yes, ma'am. This is a black-eyed Susan, okay, and it's actually it's really more of a annual here than a perennial. But if you had this, say, in a pot on your deck or in the yard, it's going to flower all summer, but it'll die back when the weather gets cold in our climate. So it's good for the season only, but it's really nice. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed on the way in, we have all kinds of daisy-like plants that have, flowers somewhat like these. We also, one of my favorites is a Shasta daisy with tall shoots and big white daisies there. So I think, let's see. So I think that's all I have as far as plants I brought. Any other questions or online?
No, there's no really questions online. I don't usually get on camera. But can I borrow your mic for a second?
Sure.
Okay. What I wanted to talk about is for those of you that are interested in house plants, Ken and Mackenzie went to a garden event in Orlando earlier this week, and one of the vendors there offers what we're calling exotic and rare house plants, and they placed an order for these plants. They'll be in later next week, but we have offered, since they're really available in limited quantities, 2, 3 of this one and maybe 5 or 6 of another one, our online shopping cart, which if you're not familiar with it, if you go on our website, it's a big block that says shop online. I've just posted on the live stream the link directly to this house plant little block that has it. There's pictures, there's descriptions, there's prices, and so on. I'll make sure that gets sent out with the handouts that we send out. And if anybody's really interested, if you come see me after the class, I'll make sure that you have a way to get the link. If you give me your email address, I'll email you the link right now. Okay, but it's kind of a unique opportunity. It's something that you're not going to find around here anywhere in any of the other stores. And so I just wanted to mention that it's available for those who might be interested. Okay, so thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Ken. And you probably know, you may not know that inside the building there, we have a whole room of houseplants, different from the ones that are on their way, but those are always available. And you don't have to worry about the weather so much because you're going to keep them indoors, obviously. But we have a really good selection of houseplants, and somebody can help you select them. Any other questions this morning? Okay, well, thanks so much for coming. Hope it's helpful.